But let's move on to our next part of the podcast, which is issues to fix before the next big step. So whatever it is, whether it's closed beta, open beta, release, whatever they decide, anything that is tied to a next big marketing push from CA, Sega, NetEase, and whoever else is involved. What kind of issues they absolutely need to fix and get right before presenting the game to a wider public. Because in the past, they have failed kind of multiple times at the same thing. So when they first advertised Arena on Gamescom, and shortly afterwards they started closed beta, went from closed alpha to closed beta, and they invited a huge amount of players. Back at that time, they still haven't fixed pathfinding, and a huge amount of players, the first experience with Arena was with that terrible pathfinding, and I imagine that turned off a lot of people from the game. So they come in, that game is absolute shit because my units don't even go where I tell them to. I was like, how can I play this game? Okay, well, forget about this game, never gonna play it again. That was a huge shot in the foot. And then next, when they went from closed beta to open beta, first they released Carthage in its absolutely broken state. Well, more elephants than Carthage. Elephants were the broken thing. So yeah, a lot of people came into the game and saw an absolutely very, very badly balanced game because of elephants. And then they still haven't fixed, or they didn't have a solution for high tier commanders on low tier units. And then everyone who played in the first weeks of open beta encountered a lot of Russian parties going around with tier 5 units with tier 10 commanders and just rough stomping noobs. So yeah, that ruins the experience for a lot of people, and again, turning a lot of people away from the game. So what kind of issues like that do they need to fix and get right for the next big step, whatever it is? So I will start here with and it is going to be unit coherency and things that are connected to that. So overall, what I mean by that is how the game feels, how it handles in terms of unit behavior. Like, it just doesn't feel smooth and intuitive at the moment. Where units often get stuck on top of each other, or just when you're puffing around a corner or just moving through a blob or whatever. Just a lot of situations where units suddenly lose their cohesion and end up all over the map. And then that causes a lot of other issues, like completely bullshit flanks. I mean, bullshit flanks happen even in like when units are absolutely cohesive, right? They haven't lost their cohesion, but bullshit flanks will still happen. But I just emphasize the problem. You have selection problems when you just click and drag. You want to select 2 units, but oops, there was one guy who got stuck in between your 2 other units or on subs of a tree, and you selected 3 units, except that 99 out of 100 guys of that unit are very, very far away. And now you have fucked up your micro because of that. So unit coherency kind of is shit at the moment. And yeah, as I said, causes a lot of issues, and they need to fix it so that when the game releases, it just feels right, feels smooth, feels intuitive, and just doesn't feel like that at the moment. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, obviously it's a key part of the game. You can't really get around that. A game that's about moving these 3 units around, something like the pathfinding and the cohesion of these units is obviously a big part of that. You want your units to perform as well as you do. And I have had problems, especially I noticed with the barricades. They just absolutely mess up units. Like, I can understand them blocking a unit, but trying to go around the side of them, your unit comes out in like 4 pieces on the other side. I'm not quite sure how he'd fix that exactly, that specific issue, but it's probably something that needs to be addressed.
Anyone else?
I think it's a huge part of the game, and it honestly defines some units. And for example, Spearman, I think, are a huge advocate of that, because you have your more densely packed formation that's Carthage and their medium or heavy spears, and they tend to hold formation a lot better than if Greek spears, for example, which is kind of their main advantage to them. But at the same time, I've had many occasions where my Greek spears are up against swordsmen, and the phalanx, instead of pushing all together, the center will get bogged down on troops, and then the edges will keep going instead of just staying rigid with the front line like a phalanx should. And then when you start taking steps backwards, you can proc flanks, you can take free damage like you're dragging your unit through another unit. A few things like that. It doesn't always happen, and it's kind of rare when it happens, but when it happens, you're like, well, shit. I didn't die because I did a poor phalanx. I died because the edge of my unit bugged, or my 20 guys on the left side of my phalanx got caught in the unit instead of, pushing back with the rest of the unit.
Okay, so to address what you both guys said, in terms of phalanx itself, I actually don't feel like, they lose cohesion, obviously, in the way you described, but if you manage them wisely, I don't think you will run into those issues, because I think a lot of those issues that you've described are actually player caused, and it is just try to do what the player tells it to do, and if the player is good enough, he won't do such mistakes. But that also is connected to how can you actually lead the unit, how you can issue the orders, because you cannot just tell them to move slightly 5 steps forward into the unit, because the game just won't let you, because, well, there's an enemy unit there and you cannot click and drag there. All you can do is right click on that unit, and then the best you can do, right, is click behind the unit, behind the enemy unit, if you want them to move forward, and then that causes the issue. That is not necessarily the issue with unit coherency itself. It is more of the issue of the controls, but that is also quite connected of how units control, how they handle, etc., etc. And one thing that is connected to phalanx, but also a lot other things, is how units detected to be in melee. It is a big issue for pike phalanx, which cannot go into phalanx if they are in melee. And it goes both sides, where, for example, one soldier gets stuck somewhere and he's being hacked down by some other units that just passes through. They're not actually engaged, but the game will still detect that you're in melee, and the main body of the unit won't be able to go into phalanx and get obliterated by another enemy. They should be allowed to go into phalanx, or the other way around. The pikes are actually engaged, you're fighting, but somehow the game decides they're not in melee, and they suddenly drop pike phalanx, and like, what the fuck? I totally were in fight with them. I was engaged in them. How did they deploy phalanx in the middle of the fight, right? And it continues beyond pike phalanx. If your ranged unit is engaged, that happens a lot. For example, your ranged units gets caught by a charge or something, and you try to escape. You dodge the charge, but a few of your guys got attacked. They got knocked over, and now they will be lagging behind because they get stuck between enemy soldiers or your allied soldiers that come to help you. And even though like 95% of your unit is out of the engagement and ready to shoot, they won't be able to do so because a few of your soldiers are still stuck there and fighting, and you cannot use focus fire. And if you want to shoot that unit, you can't, because if your unit is engaged with a unit, if your ranged unit is engaged with a unit, the only thing you can do is a melee attack order rather than a shoot order. So that's a huge issue for ranged players that I'm very familiar with, and for the other units in more or less as well. So melee detection, and George pointed out something that reminded me of what I wanted to say in the first place, is that when you're playing the game, like Arena or any other game really that involves PvP, right? The only real struggle you should have is against other players. It is about how you outsmart, outplay, outmaneuver the enemy player, rather than how good you are in overcoming the game controls itself. So that's a huge issue for me in Conqueror's Blade. Luckily, in Total Arena, it's not as bad, but still those issues shouldn't be there. Right? And I very often will feel that, oh shit, I would have easily won that engagement if not for the shitty controls, right? Or I wouldn't have been in such a shitty situation if my unit wouldn't get randomly backed down by buff fighting and some shitty melee engagement detection or whatever, or any of those issues we mentioned. And yeah, then it feels like I've gotten fucked over by the game itself and its shitty controls or shitty issues, rather than me actually getting outplayed by the enemy player. Like, if I get outplayed by an enemy player, fine. He outplayed me. He absolutely deserves to obliterate me. But if I get obliterated by an enemy player because of something wrong with the game, that just doesn't feel right. Frustrates a player and then possibly causes the player to stop playing, right? And that's definitely what developers don't want. They want players to keep playing the game and hopefully buy stuff, right? So the game can earn money. Any thoughts on that?
I guess, because what I notice in the game right now is that we still have the issue with flanking a unit that is already engaged. Sometimes it just wouldn't route, or like your flank wouldn't register at all, even though you clearly are attacking his, for example, his two flanks, side flanks, like left flank and right flank, and it just wouldn't apply the debuff, which used to be a big problem on all units, but now it's especially bad if the unit is in combat and is already heavily damaged. It just wouldn't register the flanking, so maybe some improvement there would be really nice for the future, or for the next patch, I guess. And what I really would like to see in the game is a force move command, like we have an attack command, just normal right click. We have a move attack, which is, I believe, set and right click on terrain. Basically forces your unit to move there, but also attack everything that is in, like, next to them, near them, in their line of sight, or like in the path that they should walk. But there's no force move. And what I noticed is in big battles, it's really hard to align your units to, for example, a charge path, because you have to click behind the enemy units to actually align all your 3 units to perform a good charge. And you can't really find a good place to right-click because there's no open terrain. There's only enemy units.
Yeah, that actually, Foxy, is something that we've covered in one of the past podcasts. You should definitely watch it.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't remember in which one it was exactly, but I did propose pretty much the exact same solution.
Nice.
When it comes to aligning your charge or your phalanx or whatever, actually, or when you want to walk around the edges of an engagement with your ranged units, for example, right? You just can't go there because, well, there's a unit in it, so all you can do is right click on them. But if you right click, then you'll attack them or shoot them and then cause friendly fire possibly, or something that you don't want to do, and the game just doesn't allow you to do what you want to do. That is my issue. Yes. And about flanking, yes, your issue that you pointed out, something that I wanted to mention as well, of the overall game feeling. There are instances where you completely surround an enemy unit and it just has no flanks, even though you outnumber them 100 to 1 even, and nope, I'm not flanked, fuck you. Right? I'm wavering, I'm surrounded, I'm getting killed, but yeah, one guy will still survive for so long. And it contributes to the overall feeling of that something is not right. This guy is surrounded, this unit is surrounded, should be flanked, should be decimated in seconds, but it isn't. And that's what they need to fix. The overall feeling of the game, where in many places it just doesn't feel right. Okay, I think we've exhausted the topic.